You want to talk about country music? George Strait is literally known as the king of country, a title he came about thanks to decades of back-to-back hits. When you hold the record for the most #1 hits in country music history, with 60 chart toppers, you have practically secured your name as one of the greatest, if not the greatest country music artists to ever walk the earth. George Strait poured himself into music, giving everything into molding the very soul of the genre. How a man with such love for country got to a point where he decided to quit music raised many questions among millions of fans. Stay with us as we uncover the heartbreaking moments, the unknown struggles, that led to the real reason George Strait quit music. There's another side to the king of country that you and probably most fans aren't familiar with, which is the early years before he became a name you can Google, and thousands of links would pop up saying one thing or the other about who he had become. Before, he was selling over 120 million records worldwide and becoming one of the best-selling music artists of all time. George was the son of a middle school math teacher who was raising his 2 sons to take over the family's 2,000-acre ranch. It was in high school that George started to explore other hobbies by picking up the guitar, which was fortunate, because George was a cowboy to the bone and loved everything about being one. If he hadn't picked up music, he would still have enjoyed a full life on his ranch, and we would have missed out on music gold. In the early 1970s, George was planning to enlist in the Army. Around the same time, he was also working on getting married to Norma, a woman who would go on to play a huge part in the success story that was being written. George had met Norma during his time at Pearsall High School. He had gathered the courage to ask her out, but their first date bore no fruit, and there was no follow-up. However, George realized that Norma was something special, so he reached out again, and they began dating. He would later confess that she was the first girl he ever loved. Between enrolling at Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos to join the Army, George and Norma married across the border to Mexico, and later, in December of the following year, they held a formal ceremony to satisfy their family's wishes. Together, they started a family living a quiet, steady life of service in Hawaii, a posting he had gotten by pure luck. When asked where he wanted to be stationed, George jokingly answered Hawaii, thinking it was impossible. To his complete surprise, his request was granted, and he found himself assigned to the beautiful Hawaiian Islands. While living in Hawaii, George discovered his deep connection to music after listening to an album by the legendary country artist Merle Haggard. The album, released in the early 1970s, was titled "A Tribute to the Best Damn Fiddle Player in the World" and honored Western swing legend Bob Wills. This tribute album got George more devoted to the music of Bob Wills, and this increased his own commitment to singing. To start his journey, he bought a cheap guitar and a songbook filled with the works of the legendary Hank Williams. Fortunately for him, it was as if the universe was waiting for him to make that important leap. It so happened that it was around this time that his base commander decided to form an Army-sponsored country band called Rambling Country to entertain the troops. He gave people a chance to try out for the lead singer role, and George won the position. This was the start of something good, or so it seemed. In addition to a blooming career, George and Norma welcomed their first child in Hawaii. Their daughter Jennifer was a blessing to the young couple. However, taking care of a baby came with its challenges, and the new parents were forced to return to Texas, where George took advantage of the GI Bill and re-enrolled in college to pursue a degree in agriculture. Clearly, George had penned down ranching as a full-time career to support his family. Still, he kept music alive and even took the step to join a local group of his fellow college students. Together, they formed the Ace in the Hole Band, which made its debut in October 1975 at the Cheatham Street Warehouse in San Marcos, Texas. They quickly became regular performers at local clubs, playing their style of traditional country and western swing. They earned barely enough but kept doing it because they felt privileged to be able to play genuine country music to an audience that appreciated it. The band soon got some recognition and was able to record several songs for a small independent record label. But despite this obvious step in the right direction, it was also the first situation that almost made George quit music. The songs the band had recorded for the record label didn't do so well, and George had started working on his family's ranch during the day to earn extra money, which he definitely needed at the time, because he and his wife were expecting their second child, Bubba. The responsibility of being a father to two young kids was huge, and George desperately needed his music career to move into the next level as quickly as possible. However, when George took his music to the home of country music, Nashville refused to accept him. The resistance he met in the industry declared his voice too country for the mainstream. Posh executives told him that traditional country was finished, that the world no longer wanted his style of music. Being told he had no future made George doubt his own abilities and wonder whether all the time and effort he had put into making his dream a reality was a waste. George was so affected by the rejection in Nashville that he was in the process of quitting music. He had told his Ace in the Hole members that he had started planning to take a full-time job with a company in Uvalde that designed cattle pens. George was ready to let it all go, but that was until Norma said no. She had seen how her husband fared without music and knew the idea of giving up on his dream was killing him. Knowing how passionate George was for music, she encouraged him to give his dream one more chance. She told him to give his dream one more year before making a final decision. Thankfully, Norma gave her husband every support he needed after he contacted the Uvalde company and told them he would not be taking the position. He kept playing with his band and was working on getting back on Nashville's radar. The only connection George had to Nashville was his friend, E.R.V. Woolsey, who owned a bar where the Ace in the Hole performed. Woolsey had worked for a big record label before opening his bar. It was he who convinced some people from Nashville to come to Texas and hear George and his band play. But even though they confessed that they liked the music, they still felt that the Western swing sound wasn't popular enough to be worth the effort. That rejection didn't stop George. He himself went on many trips to Nashville, trying to get a record deal, and met rejection after rejection. Record labels wanted the polished pop country sound at the time. The thought of quitting crept into George's mind once again, but he had promised Norma he would give it a year. Eventually, a major label, MCA, signed George to a record contract in February 1981. The terms of the contract were that they would start with just one song, and if the song did well, they would think about making an album and offer him a longer contract, a literal one-shot at fame. That same year, George and his Ace in the Hole band released his song Unwound. Unwound reached number 6 on the Hot Country Songs chart in Billboard magazine. And according to the details of his contract with MCA, this success got him a longer contract, marking the start of his career as a professional musician with the Ace in the Hole as his band. The following year, their next song hit number 1, and from then on, George never looked back. In the next 3, he had 5 number 1 songs in a row. George was like an unstoppable force that had come and straight up disrupted the industry. Within 4 years of his debut, he had headlined over 20 shows and had more than 1 million fans in attendance. In 1985, he won the CMA Award for Best Male Vocalist and put out his first Greatest Hits album. That same year, his album Something Special hit number 1 and included the hit The Chair. George won the CMA Vocalist of the Year again the following year and released his 4th number 1 album. However, it was in this year that tragedy struck, and it made him quit music for a moment. When tragedy struck on June 25, 1986, George's teenage daughter Jennifer lost her life in a terrible car accident south of San Marcos. Jennifer had gone out for the evening with a group of friends, led by an older teenage boy of 18. Gregory Wilson Allen, the 18-year-old, was driving his Ford Mustang and wanted to show off by speeding. He soon pushed his luck too far when he took a sharp corner at an extreme speed. The car flipped over. Jennifer, who was sitting in the front passenger seat without her seatbelt fastened, was thrown out of the vehicle. She died almost instantly. The driver and the other passengers survived the crash, which made the loss even more heartbreaking for the Strait family. The tragedy was so deep for George and Norma, who, probably like any parent, couldn't understand why their daughter was taken from them so abruptly. In this moment of grief, George was in court arguing how the driver responsible for Jennifer's death should be punished. Who could blame the heartbroken father? At first, the driver was charged with involuntary manslaughter, but as the court process continued, the charge was later reduced to a misdemeanor. He was then accused of criminally negligent homicide, which made the case even more complicated. The situation grew even more confusing because 3 different juries were brought together to decide how responsible the driver was. The fact that the charge was being watered down didn't sit well with George, yet he didn't seek retribution. Instead, in his grief, he and his family poured their pain into building something meaningful. They started the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation in Jennifer's memory, and it focused on helping others through charitable work. Following this heartbreaking event, George completely cut off his interactions with the media, refusing interviews and choosing not to discuss Jennifer's passing for a year. For a year, fans had no idea if they would ever hear from their beloved artiste. Still, they sent their prayers, hoping he and his family found the strength to deal with the loss. George later explained his absence when he eventually returned, saying, "I got even more private after I lost my daughter. That's when I really shut things down. I didn't feel like talking to anybody that wasn't really close to me. I had the attitude that nothing worse could probably happen, and so this is the way I'm going to do things." To deal with this tragedy, George kept making music during that 1 year of seclusion and returned with 11 songs that reached #1 in a row. His musical genius was just unmatched. He even had a brief foray into films in the 90s. Where he wasn't acting, he was writing the songs used in the movies. By the 2000s, he was releasing hits and after hits again. In 2000, his album went platinum, and that year he received the National Medal of the Arts from President George W. Bush. He was still winning awards for new releases, even as he celebrated his 30th year in the music world by releasing a new album. Clearly, George was still a big name in music. A year later, he released Troubadour, which went straight to the top of the country album charts. The first song from the album, I Saw God Today, also reached #1 on the country charts. George won 2 CMA awards this year, one for Album of the Year and the other for Single of the Year. In 2009, he got a Grammy Award for Troubadour and was given the Artist of the Decade Award by the Academy of Country Music. 3 years later, to the dismay of fans, George announced he was quitting touring. In late September of the year 2012, he made the big announcement that shocked the whole music world. He said he was retiring from touring. Years of constant travel and long, demanding performance schedules had worn him down, and he wanted to spend more real time with his family. To end his touring days in a grand way, he created a huge farewell tour called The Cowboy Rides Again. And when his single Give It All We Got Tonight reached #1 that same year, he had gathered 60 #1 hits. With this achievement, he beat Conway Twitty's record for the most #1 hits on Billboard's Hot Country Songs chart, surpassing Twitty's 40 with his new record. George now held the record for the most #1 songs on all charts by any artist in any music genre. However, he wasn't only famous for his many #1 songs. George was also well known for his unique tours, which included a 360-degree setup and festival-styled arrangements. In late 2013, during the tour, he won the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year award for the 3rd time in his career. The tour became a massive success. Critics praised it, major news outlets celebrated it, and fans everywhere were thrilled. The following year, he started the second part of his tour. The tour included performances by Jason Aldean, Miranda Lambert, Little Big Town, Tim McGraw, and many others. All these artists came together for the tour's final show in Arlington, Texas on June 7, in front of over 100,000 fans. This was his last concert for the Cowboy Rides Away tour at a Tan DT Stadium, and it set a new record for being the largest indoor concert in North America in 3 decades, beating the attendance of the Rolling Stones concert at the New Orleans Superdome in 1981. It even reached incredible milestones, such as earning the highest amount of money ever made from one country show, bringing in well over $18 million. George Strait's popularity was at its highest, and the tour was breaking records that almost no one else in music history had achieved. But what truly mattered most to George was not the headlines or the astonishing achievements. What made this tour special in his heart was that he shared it with his loyal band, Ace in the Hole. They had been together for over 30 years. Greed and selfishness hadn't split them. They had remained loyal to him and he to them for years. The tour became more than a farewell. This was a celebration of a beautiful relationship and a tribute to the people who stood with him through it all. The Cowboy Rides Again tour was the perfect farewell to George Strait's life on the road. But it also made people wonder if the king of country music was truly stepping away from it all. To be honest, there was no adequate answer. George didn't tour, as he said. Also, he stopped spending so much time in the recording studio, too. His last musical release came in the year 2018 when he recorded a promotional song to support a tequila brand he had invested in. If there was a real reason George finally quit music, it boils down to age, family, and the cowboy lifestyle he wasn't able to fully commit to thanks to music. One thing that fans loved about George was the fact that he wasn't just a cowboy in his songs. He lived the cowboy life for real. You already know he was born and raised on his father's ranch, but some didn't realize that he spent a lot of time on his own ranch in South Texas, riding horses, raising cattle, and competing in team roping at rodeos. He raised steers specifically for the George Strait Team Roping Classic, a big team roping event he started with his brother Buddy over 2 decades ago. George shares this love of the cowboy lifestyle with his son Bubba. They spent days together running the ranch. Bubba is also good at roping, doing well in high school rodeos, and was on the Texas A&M University rodeo team. And George has proudly said about retirement, "I enjoy doing everything with my son." He also mentioned his grandchildren, who are still too young to be part of the lifestyle. George Harvey Strait III, born in 2012, and Jillian Louise Strait, born 4 years later. These two are always keeping George company. Harvey has joined his grandpa on stage at the Houston Rodeo Show, where they sang George's song God and Country Music together. Later, at Game 6 of the 2022 World Series, both he and his sister, along with their mother and Grandma Norma, were present. George often talks about his grandkids' affinity for music, mentioning that Harvey played drums while his sister Jillian sang pretty well. Truth be told, fans did wish for more songs from the talented genius. However, at the back of everyone's mind, we knew he had already given so much. He had earned the right to his privacy, enjoy life, appreciate the work he had done, and relax with his beautiful family.